Good morning. Thank you for joining us. My name is Reverend Brianna Elene, and I am the Director of Ecumenical Innovation and Justice Initiatives at the Wisconsin Council of Churches. A little bit about the council is we are made up of 23 denominations and traditions and have about 2,000 members across the state, or 2,000 churches and about 1 million members across the state. Many people say, "Oh, how do I know I'm a member?" And if you're part of one of our traditions, you are a member. But we also do a lot of connecting with people who aren't members and love to collaborate and love to build networks. We gather the church and say the church is called to care for the most marginalized in our communities and ask how we can help equip congregations and churches to do that and be active and build partnerships in their communities. And so part of that is our work around immigration. Um, I can drop in the chat some of the links to our work for those of you who are newer to the Council of Churches and curious about what is happening. We are delighted this morning to partner with Voces de la Frontera. We've been having a lot of behind the scenes offline conversations and building to some stuff that we will share about at the end. But this morning, we're going to be talking about Know Your Rights and what it means to create family plans, two really important things that those in our immigrant community need to know. And I know there are many people here, some who are part of the immigrant community, some who are working directly with the immigrant community, some who are wanting to figure out how they can help in this current ecosystem. And so I just want to say thank you for being here. Thank you for taking your morning. Um, we will be recording this, and if you have questions, please feel free. There will be a time at the end where we have space for question and answers. But if something comes up while we are talking, go ahead and drop it in the Q&A function in the bottom, or the chat works too. And we'll kind of have time at the end to answer stuff that hasn't been covered. And so I am going to pass it over to my colleagues at Voces de la Frontera to introduce themselves.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Attorney Ruby De Leon. I am the immigration attorney at Voces de la Frontera. So I'll be leading today's Know Your Rights presentation with the help of two awesome volunteers. We have Karen and Bianca. So Karen and Bianca, if you want to unmute yourselves and say hi to everyone.
Hello, good morning. I'm Karen Urrutia Polnitz. My pronouns are she and they, and I'm very grateful to be here. I connected with Voces through a partnership with Families for Justice. I'm very grateful to be sharing this information and empowering our communities in this way.
Hi, my name is Bianca Tomasini. My pronouns are she, ella. I have been a volunteer with Voces for about 8 years or more, and I am very grateful to also be able to speak about Voces' work in this format and to the faith community. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen and Bianca. So we'll get started today with the Know Your Rights presentation and how to create a family plan. So all the material that we will be discussing today is what we present to our families when we have Know Your Rights presentations across the state. So I know a big thing that WOSIS is currently doing is reaching out to more rural areas where legal services or legal assistance of any sort is, very difficult to obtain. So that's been a big effort from our part. All right, so to get started, I wanted to go over the agenda and the training goals. So we've done our introductions, and today's presentation is basically going to be in two parts. The first part is going to be the Know Your Rights, and we're going to talk about what the rights that we all have under the Constitution of our country, and then apply them to different common scenarios that people might find themselves in. And the second part is how to make a family preparedness plan. So what can families do to prepare ahead of time in the event of family separation? Then we'll reserve some time for questions. I will ask that we keep questions general and questions that pertain to the presentation itself. If someone has something more nuanced or more individual, I will be sharing my contact information so people can reach out to me and schedule a consult or shoot me an email with any more specific questions. And at the end, I know Bianca will also be talking about other initiatives that Voces will be leading in the next few months here. So the goals that we have for the presentations that we always share with families is that the purpose of having these conversations or presentation, I should say, is not to create panic. We really want our families to be informed, to be resilient, and to be prepared. So we want to give everyone the necessary tools to prepare themselves, prepare their kids in the event of, a difficult situation like family separation could be. So we want to facilitate those conversations by telling families this is what you can do to prepare, and these are your rights in the event that you find yourself in front of law enforcement or any other difficult situations here. So for this next slide, I'm going to pass it over to Bianca to talk about the importance of membership, and then we'll get started with the first part of our presentation.
Hi, well, thanks again for this opportunity. So again, as I mentioned, I've been a volunteer with Voces de la Frontera for about 10 years or more. They are, if you're not familiar, it's a nonprofit organization based out of Milwaukee, but has many chapters in different parts of the state. I believe their main mission is to empower primarily low-wage workers, immigrants, youth, and fight for and teach them leadership and educate people on their civil rights and worker rights. They also are training people to organize, and that has been even during different periods of time, regardless of who's in the government. Now it's primarily focused on training people regarding their rights in this country so that they are not abused. So that's what this presentation is all about. But Voces also has been fighting at the state level and has been rallying people, sometimes thousands of people around the Capitol, to fight against policies that are harmful and hateful. So it's very much focused on justice and the dignity of the person. And so it is really vital to become a member of Voces if you're in this space. This is how they work, is through their membership. And I'm just gonna, it's kind of a little commercial, but it's only $30 a year. So it's very simple to just go to their website. I think I have to say that so that it's not a big ask, and yet it really powers a very, very beautiful organization. And their workers are really busy out there doing fabulous, empowering work. And so we need everybody to participate by becoming a member, and then also by joining us in the movements, in the activities that Voces is organizing. Yeah, I think if you have further questions, I can try to answer them in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Bianca. All right, so we like to start off with talking about changes that this new administration has implemented in regards to immigration policy and law. So there's been a lot of changes, but we usually highlight the ones that we think are the most pertinent, or the ones that people might be the most confused about. So one of the changes that this new administration has implemented is the expansion of the number of people who are now priority for deportation. So we're talking about people who have recently entered within the last 2 years. They are implementing that expedited removal, which means that, they're trying to remove people from the country without appearing in front of an immigration judge. So that's been a very, very big change, especially because we've had a large influx of new families and individuals entering the US in the last few years through different parole programs. Another major change has been the expansion of different grounds for mandatory detention, and that's come in the form of new legislation called the Lake and Riley Act. So what the Lake and Riley Act does, it is that it makes detention mandatory for undocumented people who have been accused of committing a theft-related crime or have some sort of theft conviction of $100 or more. So what that means is that they're detained, they're not able to post bond or bail to be released. So that also carries a lot of big consequences for people because those offenses might be, not that serious in the grand scheme of things, but now we're talking about, expansion of other grounds that make people deportable. So we mentioned the expedited deportation process now. It also encompasses the change in a recent memorandum that was revoked. So before the Trump administration entered, we had an internal memorandum by the Department of Homeland Security that made certain locations sensitive locations. That was their designation, such as churches, hospitals, and schools. So what that meant is that ICE would not prioritize enforcement in these locations. Typically, they would stay away. They were considered protected places because they were places of worship or places where students might be, in an educational setting. So those were basically not priority locations. Now, under this new administration, that internal memorandum ordering DHS officials, which would include ICE officials, that doesn't matter. If they're looking for someone and that person happens to be in a church, in a school, in a hospital, then the agents can go into those locations and, search for that person or whoever they're looking for. So that's been a huge change that a lot of these facilities are trying to navigate, right? They want to protect their patients, their parishioners, whoever they may be that, frequents these locations. It's caused a lot of panic and uncertainty, especially because people are now more scared to go to, their church or send their kids to school or receive medical help if they go to a hospital or some sort of clinic to get that attention that they need. So it's really going to be up to these facilities to come up with their own safety plans in the event that, ICE agents show up and they're looking for someone, learning how to handle that situation. Another big change has been a lot of the parole programs that were implemented under the Biden administration have been canceled. And that includes programs like CBP1. CBP1 was essentially a appointment that people can request through the CBP1 app on their phone. And if they were granted an appointment, they would be interviewed at the border. And depending on, their interview, they would be allowed to enter into the country. That was eliminated on day one. CBP1 is no more. And along with that, other programs such as CHNV, which stands for Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. Those parole programs were also very quickly eliminated. So I know something in the news recently is specific to the CHNV program that their parole status, which basically means their temporary stay in the country, has been terminated. So that's going to cause a lot of panic among people that were counting on their parole program, which typically they're allowed to stay in the country for 1 to 2 years. Now they don't know what to do. They're trying to figure out what other options they exist. I believe Haiti is still on the TPS list, but there are people who entered under the CHNV program are no longer protected under that parole program. So we're talking about two different programs here. Another change has been Venezuela is a country that was designated a TPS country. So TPS stands for Temporary Protected Status. So the US government designates a list and they update it every so often of countries that are undergoing some sort of humanitarian crisis. So that could be some sort of, war, natural disaster. Given whatever circumstances in that country, the US government says, okay, we can allow the people from this country who want to be in the United States this temporary protected status while the situation in their country improves. And a lot of the times, there is no improvement. So every so often, countries are added, removed from this list. For Venezuela, we've heard Venezuela a lot in the news lately. The Biden administration had extended the designation of Venezuela as a TPS country until October of 2026. The Trump administration revoked that extension, and if you have TPS under Venezuela and your stay or protected status, I should say, expires this year. I think there's two different expiration dates depending on when you enter the country. The first one being April and the second one being in September. After your protected status expires, then you are just not protected, right? You're in a state of limbo. You don't have a lawful status to be in the country. Your work permit is expired. So we have a lot of people that are, their lawful status here in the US is very uncertain. And again, DACA, another program which stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. If you're not familiar with the DACA program, it was a program that was initiated under the Obama administration back in 2011. Essentially, individuals who enter the US as children and completed certain requirements, like they had their high school education or GED equivalent, no criminal history, entered the country before age 17, they're able to were able to apply for a work permit and 2-year deferred action, which means 2-year protection from deportation. And that's something that's renewed every 2 years. Currently for DACA, people are only able to renew. They're not able to apply for the first time. And that was something that was changed under Trump's first administration. But DACA has been hanging by a thread for a very long time now. I think we should expect this program to be heard by the Supreme Court maybe at the end of this year at some point. So that's been always a big talking point that, for some reason, DACA has always been one of those programs that has been consistently attacked. So we really hope that, DACA remains. It has provided a lot of good opportunity for those young individuals to open up their own businesses, be, supporters of our economy in different ways, work, provide for their families. So we really hope DACA remains. And lastly, this administration has, included a lot of different ways to attack our communities. So we've been hearing, on the news, raids, deportation, operations on social media and the news, obviously, in an effort to create panic in our communities. And one of the more recent changes has been the new alien registration requirement. So I think that was in about mid-March that was first announced, that the alien registration requirement, which was a piece of law that's always been there, it's just never been enforced. Well, now it's going to be enforced again. And what this new, I shouldn't say new, but what this law asks is that essentially if you are what the US government considers an alien, which is a very outdated term, that you are to register with the US government. That would include filling out a form and providing your fingerprints to the US government. So a lot of people ask, well, what should I do? As an attorney, I can never advocate for someone to break the law, right? If the government is saying this is the law, it is what it is. But by registering, essentially people are turning themselves in to the government and saying, hey, I'm here, this is where I live, this is all my information, and essentially almost self-deporting in a way, because the government could theoretically go to that person's home and say, well, you're here unlawfully, we're going to remove you now. So then people might say, well, then I won't register at all. Well, if you don't register and you're apprehended, you are supposed to carry some sort of proof of registration that you complied with that requirement. So if you don't register, now you're facing criminal penalties for failing to register. So we're talking about a fine of upwards of $1,000. I think they said it could be up to $5,000, and you're facing potential jail time of up to 6 months. So we're talking about a federal misdemeanor charge for failing to register. And by having this type of conviction, then that also makes you deportable. So there is no winning in this situation. It's going to be up to the individual whether they're going to register or not, knowing the pros and cons of, I guess there are no pros, knowing the consequences of doing so and not doing so. But it's another way to attack our communities and, make them feel unwelcomed. So it's a very difficult decision that individuals will have to make, but that is the new requirement under the new alien registration requirement that the government is now enforcing. All right, so I am going to pass this on to Karen to talk about our rights, and then we'll then transition to applying those different rights in different scenarios.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ruby. So these are 4 basic rights that we want to highlight and also point out that they are applicable to anyone in the United States, regardless of immigration status. These are rights that belong to all of us. So the first one that we focus on is remaining silent. We'll go into those scenarios where we might ask folks to carry a local ID, but encourage folks to not say more than they should or that they need to. And remember that they have the right to remain silent and to let that be known by vocally saying, I'm invoking my right to remain silent. The second one is to not sign anything, especially if you don't understand it, don't sign it. If a lawyer hasn't explained it to you, don't sign it. Number 3 is the right to counsel, noting that especially in immigration, particularly in immigration cases, a free state attorney is not provided unless there is a volunteer or state-based program. So having counsel might need to be paid for. Number 4 is to request a phone call. And if you are detained, we want to encourage folks to have that number memorized of somebody who is a reliable person that can help you in your case, and then be able to extend that assistance with other things that they cannot do themselves. But having that one person that you can make a phone call to in the event of an emergency. Pass it back to Ruby. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. All right, so now we're going to apply these rights in different situations. So the first situation is if you have any type of encounter with the police. So if you're in a situation where you're, driving somewhere and the, police are behind you, you pull over. The first thing that you should do, and I think this is common sense for the most part, is, stop your vehicle as soon and as safely as possible. We don't want to delay stopping as soon as we can because police can interpret that as the person trying to flee. We are also recommending that people put their hands on the wheel. So the purpose behind that is that you want your hands to always be visible. We don't want to give law enforcement any reason to think that you're hiding your hands because you're trying to reach for something or you're hiding something that you're not supposed to have. So it's more to not escalate the situation. An officer may ask for your name and address. That's something that you can give to them. If you have an ID or maybe like your insurance card, but it happens to be in your wallet, your pocket, your purse, let the officer know that you're going to look for that information in any of those locations. Again, we don't want them to think that you're reaching for a weapon or something else that you're not supposed to have or hiding something. So we always want to just let them know, I'm going to reach for my ID, it's in my wallet. So that they're aware of what you're doing. We don't want any sudden movement to be interpreted in a way that, you're not meaning to. The police or sheriff shouldn't ask you for your immigration status, but if they happen to ask you, you don't have to answer any questions relating to that information. They might try to deceive you and say, well, I just want to know what country you were born in, or how did you come into the US? All of that might be a way to just try to obtain more information from that person. So again, exercising that right to remain silent is really critical. And in my presentations, I always tell people, if you forget anything that I say in the entire presentation, the one thing that you should not forget is your right to remain silent. That is your best defense in any type of situation here. So if you start feeling maybe like the officer is pressing you for questions, the questioning is not relevant to the stop, then just, again, vocalize that you are not willing to answer any more questions. You're exercising that right to remain silent. Everyone has the right to refuse a search of their vehicle without a warrant. There are certain exceptions, and that would include if the officer believes there is evidence of a crime inside of your vehicle, then they don't need your consent. So if that person happens to be arrested for drunk driving, then that would be enough for the officer to search inside of the vehicle without having to ask that person. But again, that's going to be in a more limited circumstance. So if an officer approaches and says, I want to search your vehicle, you have that right to refuse. All right, identification that we should carry. So if you are undocumented in the state of Wisconsin, you are not able to obtain a driver's license or state ID because you need to provide proof of your lawful status in the US. And if you're here undocumented, obviously you don't have that information to provide. So it becomes a lot more complicated how undocumented individuals can identify themselves. So we made two categories of identification that they should and shouldn't carry. So IDs that they should carry, any school or work issued IDs, that's a really good idea to carry those if it has your photo and name. Membership ID from your affiliation to an organization. So this is where we get to plug Voces a little bit more. So if you are a Voces member, you do get an ID with a picture as well. So that could also be some sort of identification people can carry. And another option is local ID. I think there might be a typo there, but basically local ID. So I know here in Milwaukee, we do offer the Milwaukee Municipal ID. That's something that people can easily obtain at City Hall, but you have to be a resident within the city limits of Milwaukee. You can't, live elsewhere and try to get that identification because you do have to prove your residence in the city of Milwaukee. So that is another good option. I believe it's valid for either 4 or 6 years and it costs only $10. All you have to do is prove that you live in Milwaukee, provide some sort of identity document like a passport or anything else that has your name and photo, and that's pretty much it. You can go and get your ID almost immediately. So that's something that we're also recommending that, if you're an ally that lives in Milwaukee, that you try to get your own Milwaukee municipal ID as a show of solidarity as well. IDs that people should not carry. We're talking about foreign passports, consular ID cards. So we have a Mexican consulate here in Milwaukee, and they are a big resource for providing IDs for Mexican nationals. So at this point, law enforcement is aware that if someone has a Mexican consulate ID, it most likely means that they're undocumented because they can't get any other type of identification. So that would also be evidence against that person of having an unlawful status. So basically, any foreign ID, a consular ID card, a passport, all of that can be considered evidence of not being lawfully here in the US. So we're advising people to proceed with caution when they're carrying those documents. We don't want that to be considered evidence against them. So obviously they might need that information to go to the bank, to do any other type of, transaction, and that's the only ID they have, but just do it with extreme caution and only have that on them when necessary. All right, another thing that we like to talk about is different intimidation tactics by ICE. So law enforcement is not as forthcoming as people would expect them to be, especially when identifying themselves. So ICE agents are known to impersonate local police. If they show up to a person's house, they'll make up a reason for entering the home, saying, hey, we found an ID. Can you come outside and take a look at it? Or we found this and we think it belongs to someone who lives here. So they're not going to be truthful as to why they are talking to that person or why they're at that home. They could also say that they're investigating some sort of crime and that person is a suspect, so they need to talk to them. It's very often that they'll wear gear that says police or federal agent, like that picture on the slide shows. It is not that common that you'll see something that says ICE or Immigration Customs Enforcement. That's not going to be very likely if they're in the community trying to do some sort of operation. They won't disclose that they're ICE agents. And again, they'll just, tell the person, hey, we just want to talk, can you come out here? We just want to talk to you really briefly, trying to establish trust, but it's really a way to deceive people into stepping out. All right, so now we're going to talk about what we should do if we have encounters with ICE directly. So let's say that they show up to your front door. What should you do? And this is a common scenario that people are most worried about right now. So if you have ICE agents at your door, don't open the door. Ask them to identify themselves and ask why are they there. Ask if they have some sort of warrant. They simply cannot enter your home without a valid warrant. So if they say they do have some sort of document, ask them to slide it underneath the door so that you can take a look at it and read it. Never feel rushed or pressured to read something fast, especially if it's in a language you don't understand. But if they do show you a document, verify that it has your name or the name of someone that lives there, the correct address, and that it is signed by a judge, not by an immigration official, not by a DHS or ICE official. It has to say the word judge and has to have a judge's signature. If it is a valid warrant because it comes from a judge and it comes from some sort of court and everything is correct as far as your name and address, then it is a valid warrant and you do have to comply. But if they show a document that says an immigration official signed it, it's not valid and they cannot enter your home, you should ask them to leave. If for whatever reason you find yourself speaking to them outside of your home, you have the right to remain silent. Don't answer any questions. Don't sign anything without the guidance of an attorney. If you do find yourself being arrested or detained, again, don't ask any questions about your status. Don't lie about your status. And the reason, aside from it being obvious that you should never lie about something to law enforcement, is that if you lie about your status and say that you are a US citizen when you are not, that is a very, very serious thing that immigration considers. So if you say you're a citizen, then you are forever barred from being able to obtain some sort of lawful status in the US by lying that and saying you are a US citizen when you're not. So that is a big no-no. You should also request your A number. A number stands for alien, and that is the identification number that USCIS or ICE or immigration uses to identify people. And call an attorney to help you see if there's any way that you can be released on a bond or, see what your options are at that point. All right, so here we have two examples of a not valid order or warrant and a valid one. So the form that we have on the left is Form I-200, and you can see it on the lower right-hand corner, the form number. And then at the top here, you see that it comes from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and it says warrants for arrest of alien. So I guess anytime you see the word alien on a document, you know that comes from DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, and that's not going to be a valid warrant to enter the home. That's simply an internal order asking that official go look for that person, but it's not enough to take that person, into custody. So here you'll see that it's not signed by a judge. It says the word officer or official, and I think one of the red boxes is covering that, but it doesn't say the word judge. None of the check boxes indicate that there is probable cause of a crime. It is a charging document, which means it is charging the person with committing some sort of immigration violation. But again, it is directed for more internal use for immigration officers to conduct that enforcement. Now, looking at the warrant on the right here, we see that it's issued by a court. It says federal arrest warrant or search and seizure warrant. It has the name of the person in that box up top, and it is signed by a judge. So knowing that it comes from a court by a judge, that should be enough for it to be a valid warrant, and you should comply with that. All right, so now we're going to shift gears and talk about rights at work. So if there is an enforcement operation that takes place at a person's place of employment, always very important to not run that can escalate the situation, and that could also show that there's some sort of knowledge that you're not lawfully here in the country, so that could be used against you. If ICE comes to your place of employment and looks for you specifically, asks to see a warrant. Right now, we've learned how to look at warrants and determine if they're valid or not. So we should look at them, verify that it has our correct information and that it has that judge's signature. If you are detained, excuse me, you have that right to remain silent. Again, always exercise that right to remain silent. Don't answer any questions without an attorney present. If you're detained, again, don't answer any questions about your status or lie about your status, and request to be given that A number. And business owners should establish their own protocols on how to handle if ICE or any other type of law enforcement agency comes to their workplace. Who's going to talk to them? What's the communication going to look like? All of that should be established by employers ahead of time to know how to handle that situation. All right, so we are going to open up the floor for questions. Again, I will ask that everyone keep questions more general. If you have anything more specific, I did share my contact information in the chat, and I can include it again, just so everyone has that in their feed. But Brianna, if you want to help me out here with questions.
Definitely. So someone asks, I've read that churches can designate private spaces that would still be off bounds to ICE agents, but I've not seen specific information about what spaces could be used designated. So can you talk a little bit about that, of this idea of designating private spaces and public spaces and how that works?
Yeah, so I guess the main point with a private versus public space is that if a place is designated as private, then immigration or whatever other law enforcement agency needs a warrant to enter that space that's designated as private. So a good idea would be to maybe put private signs, but we should also be careful that we can't just label everything private. Like, you can't label a lobby as private if you know on its face that it is a public location and there is that reasonable expectation that anyone can enter that lobby, right? So if people start putting stickers everywhere in a lobby saying, hey, this is private, that could be challenged in court, and most likely you're not going to win on that. So just, clearly designating what is private, if it's truly private, establishing those procedures. If you have someone show up with a warrant, who's going to communicate with that person. But that's really where it matters, if that location is private or public, is because if it's private, they need that warrant to enter.
And I'll just lift up, there's a few questions about like specifics, and just having worked in churches, think through your policies. Like, children's spaces are often private, not just because of immigration reasons, but because you don't want strangers wandering through into your nursery. And so you already, many congregations have these protocols and these policies. And so I think, just again, like, really reinforcing those boundaries. Or private offices, the pastor, the Christian educator, or the musician's office are already often private spaces that people need to be invited into. So knowing that. Ruby, can I also ask, one of the things I've understood is that, like, so you have a lobby, and let's say ICE shows up, you do have the right to ask them to leave. Is that correct?
That's correct. But if they do claim to have some sort of document, you should review it, because nothing's going to stop them from returning again at some point, so that you can at least be prepared in the event that they return.
The next question we have is, how exactly are they enforcing the alien registration? At employment places, or how?
That's a good question. Employers are not going to necessarily enforce this. What will happen is, if people don't register and they're apprehended by, police or any other agency that is working with immigration, that is when they'll find out that that person didn't register, and then at that point the person will face those criminal consequences. Are they going to go around patrolling, in places of work or other locations to make sure people are complying? Probably not, but people are driving every day, they're walking, they're going to school, they're just living their lives. If they happen to come in contact with law enforcement, then at that point they would find out that that person did not comply with the registration requirement. I should note that there are people that are considered already registered. So we're talking about green card holders, also known as lawful permanent residents, people who entered with visas, people who were paroled into the country, people who are in immigration court removal proceedings, people who have a pending a green card application and have already submitted their fingerprints. So we do have a large amount of people that are already considered registered under this requirement.
And Bianca's asking, is a warrant signed by a judge required if you encounter ICE, well, if you're outside or stopped in a car?
That's tricky because I mean, if you're stopped in your car and they start asking you questions, simply don't answer anything. But that would be a very peculiar situation if they happen to have a warrant and they happen to come across you. So I would just, you could ask them that if you wanted to be on the safe side. I think in that scenario, it would be more likely than not that they would not have any type of, warrant for that person.
I am going to lift up, there is a question in the chat from Carla about Haitians, and we're going to invite you to contact Ruby directly about that because it's a much more specific, nuanced question. And so we're not going to answer that live. So Carla, go ahead and email Ruby and ask her about that. I just wanted to make sure we get all the like really legal ones. And then there's some more general questions about ICE, but Ruby does have to leave at 10 o'clock. So I want to make sure we get those in. So I think we can move to some of the even more general ones about like, has ICE been active in Wisconsin?
That's a good question. It's really hard to determine any reliable reports. Here at Voces, we do have a rapid response line that people can call in, if their loved ones are being detained or if they're being detained or if there's an ICE, sighting somewhere. So what we've done is we've done our best to go to that location and verify, but I can't say with certainty that yes, we've had a large ICE presence. No, we haven't, because there really isn't any reliable information to go off of, especially when the administration came in. A lot of people were panicking. People were calling in different sightings of different vehicles they had never seen before. So I can't say with certainty that, Wisconsin has been a priority for enforcement, but, that can change too. And, whenever the government thinks that they need to, do some sort of operation here.
One of the things I can share that was brought up in a hearing that I was up at the Capitol is they shared that because they had someone from ICE come testify, and they shared, I believe that there are 11 ICE agents who like work in Wisconsin. I think most are in the Milwaukee area. So they were just, some of the concerns was about like, oh, someone's picked up in Eau Claire. It takes 4 days for people to get up. And there are some legal questions around that of how long people can be legally held by law enforcement before ICE can come get them. And so there are mechanisms. I think it's more that question of raids or beat that sort of thing is a little less clear. Here's a bit more about that the sanctuary lobby question of space. If a church where the sanctuary and lobby are separated by doors, is it legit to post sanctuary as private, even though in other situations we say everyone is welcome?
Well, I'll tell you this much. Under the law, there's this test called the reasonable person test, right? So if would a reasonable person think that that sanctuary location is private? If you can answer in the affirmative, then yeah, you can go ahead and post that sign, but I wouldn't just post it knowing with the understanding that most people know that they have, access to it if they're not, part of, that church staff.
Advice for pastors/churches that want to be allies, but might be hesitant to get into the sanctuary identity. Good ideas. So what does it look like to be an ally in this space?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think that's going to look different for everyone, but if you want to be more involved, but maybe like this person mentioned, they're hesitant to really, come into that identity. I would say, maybe if you want to share information on all your rights workshops that are being held, let your church community know, hey, if you want to, be an ally, you can go to these events, educate yourself, and share it with maybe vulnerable communities that might be, undergoing this, I guess, attack with the heightened immigration scrutiny that's going on right now. I think that would be a good idea, or even maybe hosting your own and having a few people from your church that are leaders to know what's going on and they can share and advocate in their own different ways. There's also red cards, which are these pocket-sized cards that have your basic rights, so people can carry those around. So if you want to have a few at your church and share them with people, that would also be a good idea to have, church members to have them on them if they're out in the community, can share. So doing those types of things is definitely very helpful to spread the word. In a situation that someone might be detained, you can provide a red card and they know what their rights are.
And we'll share a few details too at the end after the question and answer about some ways to do some ally work. Um, will the judicial warrant be from a local judge depending on your physical location? I think a question of like, where's the judge?
It could be a judge at the state level. So here in Wisconsin, we have circuit court judges. So if you see something that says whatever county you're from, circuit court judge, it could come from the circuit court judge. It could come from a commissioner, a court commissioner. It could come from a federal judge. It could come from a federal magistrate judge. So it can come from those different levels, but as long as you see judge attached somehow or some sort of tribunal mentioned, then you would know it's a legitimate warrant for entry or apprehension.
And then we've got, what should we be aware of regarding legislation that is being introduced regarding enforcement by local police of ICE activity?
Yeah, I think that is changing. I know here in Wisconsin, there's certain counties where different sheriff agencies do comply with what's known as 287G, which means that, if a sheriff deputy pulls someone over, they can ask about their immigration status. I don't know all the counties off the top of my head, but I believe Waukesha County is one of them, Brown County. There's like 7 or 8. I think Winnebago County might have recently added themselves to that list. But I know on our website, on the Voces website, you can see all the counties that do comply with 287G. So that could be something that will be changing where more counties will abide by 287G, which is again that collaboration between the local law enforcement agency and ICE to, ask about immigration status and turn them over to ICE if they're found to be here not lawfully. So that's something that I imagine is going to be changing as well.
Right. I'm just pulling up to it. If you just Google 287G, there's stuff on the Voces page, and the ACLU of Wisconsin are collaborating on that. There also are a couple bills up at the Capitol right now that the Wisconsin Council of Churches is tracking. And I can drop, before we end, information that you can get involved in our advocacy work. We had organized people to show up to testify against the bill on the Assembly side, and we are watching and waiting for a Senate hearing that may happen. And it basically would kind of force these sort of agreements to happen between law enforcement and ICE. And so we are thinking the governor has said he would veto those, but like it's all very much in flux. And there's the question of even talking about this creates more fear. And yeah, so I think it looks like we are, sounds like we are going to share the slides. And we are also going to be sharing a recording of this. So know that you will have time to do that. Oh, are we going to talk about emergency planning a bit then?
Yes.
Sorry, I thought we
Yep.
were,
Sorry.
I thought we were,
No. We got a little carried away with the question. So I'm gonna hand it over to Karen to talk about the emergency plan with families, which I think is now our second part of our presentation. I believe it's a lot shorter than the first part that we talked about. So Karen, I'll pass it on to you to talk about family preparation.
And I
Awesome.
think, Ruby, you're going to have to sign off. So this may be us saying thank you very much for your time.
Yes, absolutely. I will hang around till 10 or until they let me know my appointment is here. So I'll be here in the background. But, thank you so much to everyone for allowing Voces the space to share this information. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my information one more time in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruby. So as we talk about family preparedness, the first element we want to look at is gathering important documents. And I have here a note that we want to make sure those are together, accessible, and that we have copies of them. So also ensuring that folks who need to have all those together have them in a safe, waterproof, and fireproof box or container. And that everything is together. So that could include birth certificates, passports, if children have dual citizenship, that both of those are together, any immigration documents, marriage and divorce certificates, any powers of attorney, and we'll talk a little bit about what those might be, identifications and copies, medical records, proof of continuous residence in the United States, school records, financial documents, a list of emergency contact numbers, both within this kind of secure container, and we're also going to recommend that for families, they have those posted somewhere potentially more easily accessible for any children or youth in the family. And then any other documents that are important in the family. So having those all together, accessible, and with copies. And then in preparing families, we know these are sensitive and challenging conversations to have, but they're very important. And so we're encouraging our community to take the time to have these conversations with families, and noting that they might happen in stages and that they might need to be targeted or have different conversations with children at different age levels. So using simplified language and age-appropriate language for kids in different ages. But those conversations, we want them to include educating families and children on their rights. So things like the four rights that we talked about, kind of highlighting some of those situations, especially with regards to the home, and maybe like posting a copy of the differences between the judicial and DHS documents so that families would know what to look for. Ensuring that everyone knows where the important documents are located and has access to them if they are in a safe or lockbox, like who has the key, where is that found? Ensuring, so we talked about, who is that person who's going to get the phone call, ensuring that the family knows who that emergency contact is in case someone is detained, who is going to be taking care of everything. Updating school contacts so that the school knows who would be picking up kids in the event of someone's detainment, who's authorized, and making sure that the school has that proper authorization. Within those important numbers, having a lawyer's contact information easily accessible, and helping kids to memorize important phone numbers so that they could be written somewhere accessible for kids, but also that kids have one or two of those memorized as well. And this is a lot for families to think about. So we want to encourage them to think about this in steps. So the first of those being, what do I need? What is everything I need to have together? And who is available to help? Specifically, if we're going to have someone designated for some of our power of attorneys, we want to have a conversation with that person, or if there's a few people, outlining our expectations and our boundaries, what is going to be that plan. So first putting that together with the person who's going to be kind of taking on that role. And then once you have a clear plan with them, discussing that plan with the family so that the family knows what might happen in the event of a detainment. And then after that, filling out the power of attorney forms, and we'll take a look at what those might entail. So the first one might be temporary custody of any children. So we have, there's a specific form that delegates authority to a trusted person to care for children. And those people can get either full or partial power of attorney. So they might get, the power of custody for things like picking kids up, being able to sign permission slips, that sort of thing, but maybe not to make medical decisions. So on that form, people can kind of designate which powers they'll be giving. Under Wisconsin law, that power of attorney is only valid for 1 year, so it needs to be renewed each year. It can be notarized, it's not required, but is highly recommended. And we'll note that notaries, we want to make sure people aren't taken advantage of with that. So if a notary is charging, it should be, I think, no more than $5. And then there are various resources for access to free notaries if that's needed. For financial power of attorney, again, we'll designate someone for that to act on their behalf as it relates to assets and accounts. And again, is that person going to have full power of attorney for all assets and accounts, or will it be split? And that can be revoked. This one does not expire, so it will last until that person decides to revoke it in writing. And I think if we have any questions about any of those, we can do that, but I know our time is short. So I know maybe I can hang out for a minute afterwards if there's anything with that. But I know that Bianca has some exciting information to share with us about upcoming actions. So
We have 2 questions quick.
okay.
So Karen asked, and I just want to lift it up. Ruby answered it in the chat, but in case you didn't see, about the option of a tribunal instead of just a judge. And Ruby says a tribunal is another word that means court. So anything that goes before a tribunal would also still be signed by a judge. We also have a question about connecting in what might not be considered immigrant communities. I think many people think of Madison or especially Milwaukee. It's like that's where so many immigrants used. This person lists up the Dells and vacation type areas, but also farms. And I don't know if you guys want to speak to this, but I know Voces de la Frontera is developing resources across the whole state, and there are organizers throughout the entire state. I also know that there are a lot of organizations that might not be the people you think of immediately as immigrant organizations, but Catholic Charities is often very involved in immigration work, refugee resettlement agencies. So reach out and build networks. I also think for those of you who are part of faith communities, this is actually a great way. Are there farmers in your church who have connections on their farms? We have these networks, and so part of your role as an ally can be helping to build those connections to say, let's make sure this information gets to the people who need it. And I think from my experience, Voces is definitely willing to be a resource in that. So if you start to figure out where there are people who need information, be in touch. You can be in touch with me and I can help get you connected, or just contact Voces directly. And we can help get resources to where they are needed. I am always astounded by the state of Wisconsin, because I think we have this image sometimes that, oh, there's the big cities is where all the immigrants live, and that is not at all the case. There are immigrants throughout our state. There are African immigrants way up in Barron County is huge, and many, as lifted up, many of our farms, many of our tourist industries are served by immigrants, and so it is huge, and it is everywhere in this state of needing to be aware and helping to resource people. So Bianca, do you want to lift up some opportunities?
Hi, yes, thank you. So quickly, I just want to make a comment about the family preparation, that don't let anybody please tell you, oh, why don't they just take their children with them? Because people are petrified of going to detention. Imagine going to detention with your child. Anyhow, that was a little comment about that. And so, yeah, there are these rallies that Voces is planning for May 1st in Milwaukee, and then May 2nd, Friday, May 2nd in Madison. So depending on where you are and what your availability is, please really consider joining either in Milwaukee, it's on Thursday, May 1st, starting in the morning, the rally in Madison, where we're hoping to have a big show for the churches and congregations in the area. It's in the afternoon of Friday, May 2nd at the Capitol. And there will be more information, I believe, coming from Wisconsin Council of Churches on possibly a toolkit that would help your pastor, your clergy organize the congregation towards marching and being present, and making a statement about what faith means in terms of protecting vulnerable people, immigrants. I think we really need to speak up, and it's very important. And then also encouraging a service within your church, within your place of worship, that will lift up equally immigrants and vulnerable people, and tying in with, of course, scripture, which would be the basis. So we hope that all your congregations can join us in either of these two events.
Yep. So the 27th, a day of prayer. And it's actually, and Bianca hasn't been told this yet, but we're developing an interfaith Bianca's talking about it. And she doesn't know all the details. Like I haven't told her. Um, this is building the plane as we're flying it, right? But there's a toolkit being developed that is interfaith. And so if you are not Christian and you are another faith, there is space for you. Like there are resources we are developing for you. Our plan is to have it done. I'm committing this publicly, so now I guess we have to, but the goal is next Wednesday or Thursday, and then really getting it out the week after that. It will be on the Wisconsin Council of Churches webpage. I think Voces is going to help distribute it as well. Having a day of prayer on April 27th, make protests or make signs with scripture or protest or that sort of thing, maybe during fellowship hour or time, so that you can then prepare for May 1st in Milwaukee is a march, and then May 2nd in Madison. And so this is a great way to show allyship. We are also developing resources for individual congregations to put up a sign and be visible in your community. Say immigrants are welcome here. Put up a big old banner that you get printed, or put some door signs on. And they're actually being designed in a way that churches, but also someone lifts up restaurants, libraries. They're actually not, I don't think any of them are explicitly faith-based, so that the goal is have your local farmer put it up. Well, if it's safe, but find those allies in the community. Churches are one piece of a big puzzle. And so many of you have these resources and these connections. Thank you both. And we thank Ruby, who had to go and do some really important work. But please reach out. Voces de la Frontera is available. And Ruby is available. If you have, I am available, probably more on the legislative advocacy side, but in connecting, but we are here. We are doing this together. We are not alone. And so I think that is part of our call, is to help each other understand that we are not alone and we are in this work together. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today.